Hello there. Um, I've been watching Iceberg content quite a bit, and I'm one of the kind of people who has a very collective taste. And I was thinking, what if we start around the 70s or 80s with industrial music before really the more electronic take? So this is before Frontline Assembly and KMFDM and Nine Inch Nails. This is the pure stuff. And I'm going to start with tier one right away because why not? Why not? So here's an example of what we're going to be doing today. You can't see it, but I can. And yeah, this is tier one. This is stuff that you've most likely heard of, and will only be getting worse from here. There's going to be stuff that I know a lot of people are going to know from the second tier and third tier. We're around fourth tier and fifth tier. We're looking at very obscure industrial, and obscure industrial from these eras is going to be way off of a lot of people's radar. But I know for a fact that there are a lot of people who are really into industrial, and this might be a good video for you because you'll know all about the stuff I'm talking about. So it's going to be cool. And you can tell me in the comments how you know every single project in here. Thumbs up. I'm going to tell you exactly what I meant by some of these because some of these are so rare that you probably can't look them up. And of course, there are some projects affiliated with projects that are just obscure because they only have one release, or they've only worked with an artist once and they've never released anything and no one talks about them anymore. And I kind of wanted to mention a few projects I don't think that are in here, such as like Bringing Up Baby from Come Organization, which is a full album, and they've worked under Come Organization, and that's a White House or label like Susan Lawley, you know. And I don't know if I mentioned The Pump in here, but that's a Nocturnal Emissions project, an early Nocturnal Emissions project. So let's just mention those to get them out of the way. The Pump and Bringing Up Baby. Of course, I put Nocturnal Emissions in this list, so we'll get to that eventually. Let's just start with tier one though. Einstürzende Naboten. Now this is a really popular project. A lot of people already probably know what Einstürzende Naboten is, even if you're not too familiar with industrial. They're a German project, and there's this kind of thing going around saying that they wanted to be a regular band, but they were so poor they had to sell all of their equipment, and they became an industrial band. I believe they were one of the pioneers of industrial music. And that goes into Throbbing Gristle, the pioneers of industrial music. Now, I have a lot to say about Throbbing Gristle. They're one of my favorite projects. Top tier because they're well known. They're one of the most accessible, but I have friends that say that they're not as accessible as other bands in this top tier. So, yeah, let's just say their first projects were like Live at the Death Factory, Live at Hackney, the best of, some IRC cassettes, you know. But Second Annual Report, I think, is their first like widely distributed project, and it's just like a compilation of live material, and it's got some funny moments where there's a DJ, I think, yelling at a crowd, and then he plays Iggy Pop to calm these like pissed off like concert goers. So it's a really interesting like thing. And with Throbbing Gristle, they weren't scared to show that they pissed a lot of people off, and I admire that. You get to at least feel the energy of the people who listened to Throbbing Gristle for the first time and they were pissed off, and I don't know. You'd have to explore that for yourself to really experience that for the first time. Imagine like Alan Vega and Suicide when those really, if you know who Suicide is and Alan Vega, you probably already listened to Throbbing Gristle, but um, yeah, I might not go into their shows, but they pissed off a lot of people too. And now let's go to Test Department. I like to say that this is an early example of Marshall Industrial, kind of like Leibach. They're definitely influential. They were probably near the 1980s, the early 1980s, and they have some really good albums. I'd recommend them, to anyone, but I think that the reason they're so high up on the list is because I feel like a lot of people, in the industrial communities know who Test Department are, and their live shows are really popular. I mean, you probably know what Test Department are, and if you don't, go listen to Unacceptable Faces of Freedom. I believe I keep that right here next to me. Or I probably put it back in my thing, but it's a cool album. Now let's go to SPK. SPK was inspired by the book Socialist Patience Collective, with the preface by Jean-Paul Sartre. They're really inspired by like mental illness and like depravity and like on a cultural level and all of this stuff. And I mean, they have some of the best albums of all time in the industrial like thing. If you want a like album experience, go listen to Like and Try. I mean, that's for everyone. It's like Screaming Corpses, I think, translated from German. But my favorite album from SBK, Information Overload Unit. And of course I love all the live material because I love that gritty punk, post-punk kind of like environment. Another thing is a lot of these bands kind of like go off of the kind of post-punk aura, if that makes sense. But they're very punk in aura too. And of course SBK's early material is closer to punk rock. They have singles, Another Dark Age is another really good one. They have really early singles that were really influenced by like pop, or not pop, but punk rock. Like No More and Contact and Mechano, I think. It's a really interesting rabbit hole. But they have a few albums. Auto da Fe, which is a compilation album of all their singles, so go check that out. Doesn't have No More on it, sadly. Go check out, all their material. Let's go to Coil. Coil is a very interesting project. Coil, I don't even know where to start with Coil. Scatology, Horse Rotovator, I believe. My favorite's Unnatural History. I couldn't tell anyone what to listen to, but Coil is probably the most accessible band, the easiest to get into, and the one I'd recommend to anyone who wanted to get into industrial, because not only is there the music aspect, but also the network. You're going to find a lot of industrial projects and even some more obscure industrial artists who worked alongside Coil, like Monty Kazazza, which we'll get into. So Unnatural History, Scatology, Horse Rotovator. I'd say 1,000 Lights in a Darkened Room, but, I don't know. I think backwards, too. If you like Nine Inch Nails, I believe that was recorded at Nothing Studios in New Orleans. Interesting history. Cabaret Voltaire. I don't really know how to say that. I've never been super into them, but it's probably just because I've been into like everything else. So I wouldn't say that it's just all like something you should avoid. but it's just like something I never got into. They have some good material though. Their early material is really good, and I feel almost like they probably were innovators of the industrial genre. And of course, Cabaret Voltaire has an album called "The Killing of America." I think. Go check it out. Go check this project out. I wouldn't say anything negative about it. I think it's good, what I've heard, but I just never was really into it, so I can't really tell you much. And I wanted to get into Die Krupps. They're a German band, of course. Industrial. Their newer material just got more progressively more mainstream, but I think that it's an interesting project to look through. Cool project. I don't even think this is official, actually. I thought there was an older one that I could just bring up. Die Krupps. Let's see, Krupps. There has to be an early project that they did, but maybe their earliest materials from 1981. So I don't know. You get into that. That's probably the most accessible, or some of the most accessible material, because it's more metal, and their early material might be interesting too. Now we get into one of a lot of people's favorites, Killing Joke. If you've been into industrial or music, and I don't know, Killing Joke seems to come up a lot. There's some really good projects by Killing Joke. I recently picked up the Courtler Talks. I don't know how to exactly say it, but it's an esoteric reading, and it's really interesting. I feel like Killing Joke is way more heavily involved in the network of artists of the industrial genre than I could ever say, because I've never really followed them too heavily, but Killing Joke, they have really good music, Living in the 80s, stuff like that, and they're more of an accessible band, so I don't know much about them. I just like the more obscure type stuff. And I put William Burroughs in here. William Burroughs was a writer who was affiliated with Industrial Records. William Burroughs worked alongside Genesis P. Orridge and was friends with SPK. This guy was involved in the industrial, just atmosphere. He was involved with the network of industrial artists. Some of the most popular artists, just of their time really knew Burroughs. I'm sure that even Ministry worked with Burroughs or whatever, or they sampled Burroughs. William Burroughs is a writer, though. He writes science fiction, but I think that he is important enough to be included in the industrial iceberg just because of his influence, his affiliations with the network of industrial artists. It's just it's good. It's good. Okay, now we get into Fad Gadget. Now, the reason I put this so high up, because Fad Gadget is an artist who has worked with Boyd Rice, and Boyd Rice is probably really high too, but he was on Stranger Things soundtrack, and he also influenced, Depeche Mode in a pretty major way. So, if you like Depeche Mode, you'll like Fad Gadget. Fad Gadget is amazing, and I could not recommend Fad Gadget enough. Okay, now we get into Alien Sex Fiend. Really, really good music from Alien Sex Fiend. You start where you want to start. I like Alien Sex Fiend, but I think that just referencing them should be good enough to just like go off of. I mean, Now I'm Feeling Zombified, whatever you want to look up. Alien Sex Fiend is a very good project. Now we get to talk about Liebach, which have been on my radar for a really long time, but as of recently, they've underwent some extreme controversy because of their live show in North Korea, and it was a very interesting experience. They were on John Oliver, I think, not on like actual. He was just talking about Liebach, and they have really good material. I mean, some of their stuff is really good, and it's just like hearing somebody just like joke about Liebach who's like really popular. I mean, whatever you feel. Oof. Now, Psychic TV, the more accessible project from Genesis Bjorge. Easy to get into, but it's a very strange project, and it's a very weird aura. There's a lot of controversy attached to Psychic TV too, with the Temple of the Psychic Youth, I believe. There was some cult behavior, and it's too much to get into. I don't want to, but they had a really popular song, "Godstar," about Brian Jones, and there's, of course, one of my favorite stories. Somebody remixed one of their songs and they put it on their album with Invisible Records. Martin Atkins, Invisible Records. And the sample of this remix was a writer whose name is Francis E. Deck. One of, like, a really interesting guy. I just want a reason to talk about Francis E. Deck, so I'll reference him now. But I really love his writings. They're really, really bad sometimes, but like, if you like science fiction, I mean, Francis E. Deck is good, just contextualized to the sense where he's extremely mentally ill, and he's, very interesting individual. Now, White House. White House, in my mind, has always been a weird kind of like place. I like their early stuff a lot. I like their pedal stuff. At one point, I just feel like they wanted to piss everyone off, and they just like try to lean into that as much as they could. It's sadistic music, that's their whole thing. They like sadism. I'm sure that they're really inspired by like Marquis de Sade and like 120 Days of Sodom, Salo type stuff. And they really like serial killers, and they talk about concentration camps. White House is a very popular project, though. It's been sampled by Daveed Diggs and Clipping with Wriggle, Like, it's interesting. I've always kind of disliked White House just because of how like they approach like copyright and stuff, and how they really hold back material. I don't want to say anything bad about White House because I love their material, and like I think it's brilliant, like to a certain point. I mean, like, I'm not a big fan of the spoken word computer digital noise stuff by them. I really like Total Sex, though. I think that's one of the best albums of all time. But that's from the perspective it is a power electronics album, and if you don't like power electronics, avoid it. I'll just say that, because I don't want to be, somebody who's like saying, oh yeah, this is like the best album ever, and then just like recommend you total garbage. If you don't like power electronics or noise or whatever, don't listen to Total Sex. But it's a very deeply industrial textured album. That's my perspective. It's very loud. It's like being in a dungeon, like a torture chamber. It's a very, very interesting experience. But White House, has some of the best industrial, the most tasteless early industrial, beside like Non, I guess, but at least White House is more intelligent than Non, I think. I think that White House did have some good philosophy behind their material and bringing awareness to depravity and like being more of a cultural reflection and like I'm not sure. I can't pick William Bennett's mind, but I think that if you were into that kind of thing, then maybe it'd be an interesting place to go. They are really inspired by really interesting culture and they take it to an extreme. And I'll say that the thing about White House is they love their extremeness and it's so high up here on the iceberg because everyone has heard why you never became a dancer, who has been even slightly on the internet. If you have been on the internet for long enough, I'm sure that you heard why you never became a dancer because it was a creepypasta for the longest time. Speaking of creepypastas, I should have mentioned Throbbing Gristle with Hamburger Lady. You've probably heard that too because another creepypasta. There's a real sense of eeriness to this material that can be really used to make somebody uncomfortable. I'll say that. And then right away, Nurse with Wound. I can't speak too much about Nurse with Wound. I think it's one of those projects you have to experience yourself. I'm sorry, but look up Nurse with Wound and go through their catalog. It's so extensive, there's so many great projects. There's so many interesting people. And yeah, just go look up Nurse with Wound. Don't even listen to me talk about it. Non. Boyd Rice. Now, Boyd Rice is really high up on this because a lot of people like Boyd Rice. But I'm not here to be totally celebratory. I want to justify why someone like me would like Boyd Rice. Someone who is considered like, or someone who considers themselves to be more like politically involved or philosophy, I don't know. But Non with Boyd Rice has some of the best militant industrial that you can find. And the early material, I think, almost really works as companions to the really more abstract Coil material, because even Non worked with Coil. But Non has breadcrumbs and some very interesting, edgy material. Some of the worst movies are one of the worst movies I've seen of all time, Pearls Before Swine. So, just to get this out of the way, I'm not a huge fan of Boyd Rice as a person. I wouldn't even go as far as to recommend most of his new material, and I thought it was pretty stupid for a lot of his live material at a certain point where he's sampling obscure fascist anthems and doing Roman salutes and reading out of Might is Right of all books. Non was also affiliated pretty heavily with the Satanic Church at one point with Anton LaVey, and there's an overlap there because Anton LaVey really enjoyed Might is Right, apparently, because he plagiarized Might is Right in the Satanic Bible. It's a rabbit hole to explore, but you'd have to really take into consideration the context of Boyd Rice's character, and I want to be as thoughtful and straightforward as possible so I don't upset anyone who enjoys Non's material, because I think that if you follow him from the perspective as an artist, you probably have more enjoyment than me. But anyway, I do want to recommend Blood and Flame and Easy Listening for the Iron Youth. These are accessible to an extent projects, Blood and Flame is probably one of my favorite just like noise albums. I mean, it's minimal. It's almost taking this hypnagogic kind of like atmosphere. You know how it's just like hypnotic. It's, you know, I say hypnagogic because I really like that kind of like genre of like, you know, I couldn't really say James Fario type stuff, like really texture heavy, really hypnotic, really surreal. Um, Sometimes when I listen to those projects, I like to imagine I'm reading this like text. I don't know. I like to imagine I'm reading some kind of really abstract interpretation of occult text that really heavily leans into the aesthetics of the occult. But I'd say if you really want occult material and esoteric material, go listen to Coil. I mean, Unnatural History is it's like exploring like an environment, like a castle. Like, well, Non is kind of just all like more like an archival kind of sense, like you're unearthing something. That's my interpretation, and I wanted to say that to justify why I enjoy Non, but also contextualize why I think that it's good to reflect on who Boyd Rice is as a character. As an artist, I really enjoy what Boyd Rice does, but sometimes I think that he makes certain decisions in his artistic endeavors that I do not quite agree with. There's also some early material like pagan music, some really interesting vinyl material, evidence, I forget. Physical Evidence. Physical Evidence is a good project too. I don't want to go much more than Non. I think that Non's one of those projects you have to talk about because if you're going to mention it and you're going to mention why, you have to listen. You have to mention everything and try not to piss off everyone because I just have, you know, certain reflections on art, and I think that, yeah, if I'm going to be talking about it. Zero Comma. I put Zero Comma up so high because of the affiliations within the industrial scenes. I think that everyone from like Coil to Genesis Peorage, all of these other people, and I think Zero Comma, the person behind is Zodawit. I don't want to be like insensitive just in case, so I'm gonna say Zodawit. And yeah, Zero Comma is one of my favorite projects. It's got like references to the Kabbalistic cross and like really esoteric stuff. And I mean, if you like esoteric too, Zero Comma is just all like probably the most like good material you can find. And I mean, I did want to put it up so highly too because of Corpse's Catatonic and that one project that had the percussion with the skulls and the bones, and you know, I mean, it's kind of well known at this point, so just because of like the backstory and the history, and you know, if it wasn't top tier, it's second tier, so, but I'm glad I put it in top tier just so I could talk about it. Second tier, I'm going to have to do more research because I did put some projects that are fairly popular, but I have no idea. So I'm going to be taking notes, and then I'll just do the rest of the tiers. I'll probably just do one at a time.